So Beyerdynamic sent out the new DT700 and 900 Pro X headphone, and we're going to compare them today against the 770, the 990, the Tiger 300R, and my daily driver workhorse, the DT1990. And we're going to talk about studio work, music listening, and FPS gaming as well. You ready? Let's go! These are both priced at $299 US, and to add some context, the existing 770 and 990 go for around $160 to $170 depending on where and when you buy, and the 1990 goes for around $550 to $600. Those existing headphone models have been in market for quite some time now, so their pros and cons are pretty well known, but if you're new here, we'll do a quick review. The 770 Pro is a closed-back studio workhorse and general all-rounder that's great for the price point with decent bass extension and a nice wide soundstage for a closed back. The 990 Pro is regarded as a great gaming headphone. It's open back, it has a very forward high end and a nice big wide soundstage. The high end on these can be borderline painful for some users out there, so for that reason I recommend them for gaming and not for much else. The big downside to both models is that they lack a detachable cable. The DT1990 is built super tough, but a little heavy. They benefit in comfort and sound from a pad swap, and they do have a detachable cable. They have a well-known Sibilant hotspot right around the 8K range, and once you hear it, you can't unhear it, so I generally EQ that point down a little bit. Outside of that, they're arguably one of the best dollar-for-dollar dynamic driver headphones around, and I recommend them often. The big downside for most users is the price, though if you wait for holiday sales, you can usually get them at a pretty solid discount. So the 700 and 900 Pro X bring a price point that more or less splits the difference between the two existing tiers, and they do have detachable cables, 3-pin mini XLR. You get two in the box, one short at like 6 feet and one long at like 10 feet, both straight cables and both with 1/4 inch adapters. You also get a drawstring bag in there and what looks like a festival wristband. The big idea behind these is that you can use these in a studio setting and with a wide range of devices, because at 45 ohms, they're not really power hungry. So they're right at home on your DAC amp setup or your interface, but you can also get really high volume and full dynamics out of lower power sources like your phone or your laptop. The 700 is the closed back version. These give you more sound isolation, i.e. you can't hear as much of the outside world, and a more focused soundstage, so they sound a bit narrower overall. The 900 is the open back version, and because you can hear more of the world around you, it creates a much wider soundstage. But what about the DT880 Pro, the semi-open back version from the original lineup? That's a great question and not a very popular opinion, but I don't really care for the 880 so much. It's the most neutral and balanced sounding headphone out there from Beyer, so much so that it was just unremarkable to me. I would rather own a 770 and a 990 and use them for different applications than I would want to own a single 880. So interestingly enough, a semi-open back didn't make the jump to this new line. Build quality on these is classic Beyerdynamic. They're still designed and manufactured in Germany. The aesthetic is simplified and modernized versus the earlier models. Steel frame headband and PEEK plastic on the cups. Don't be afraid of the plastic. It's really high quality, very durable. Faux leather on the inside of the headband, and all these parts are replaceable as well, like we see on all their other headphones. Ear pads are velour, very soft, very plush. Even though they look smaller, the internal opening is the same as previous versions. You just don't have the same taper as the old models. Because of this, they have a tendency to put a little more pressure on the top ridge of my ears, which is less comfortable for long wear sessions. As usual, these pads are easy to remove and replace as well. So this detachable mini XLR. The 900 that I used for this review I actually bought because the model that Beyer sent out had a short where the connector went in, and anytime I bumped that at all, it either gave me a little bit of static or it completely lost audio in the left cup. I've owned numerous Beyerdynamic headphones over the years, and a defect like this was a first, so if your copy is doing this, it's not normal. Just return it for one that doesn't. It's also just like a touch too long, where it kind of bumps your shoulder depending on your posture, which is weird because it's the same length as the connector on the 1990, but something about this design makes the flex of the cable as it exits the stress relief like not as flexible. It's the same connector that they use on the 1990 as well, so I tried both cables on the headphone and can confirm there's just something a little physically off with the new connector. In terms of comfort, there is notable clamping force on these, which is surprising for a Beyer headphone. My 1990s are really broke in, so that's not really a fair comparison, but my latest 770 copy is only a couple weeks old, and it has more forgiving clamping force out of the box. So getting right into sound, a lot of what I say about one of these models is going to carry over to the other model as well, because they both share the same driver, the same diffusion pad that's over the driver, and the same ear pads as well. The 900 Pro X comes across as a really technical headphone. It does everything with great detail, separation, and speed. It's really easy to pick out every little thing happening in the high end. The imaging, the directional awareness is wild. It's like completely three-dimensional. The mid-range too, same thing. The bass is adequate and effective. It's not bass heavy, and it can be lacking in sub-bass, which is not shocking for an open back. But what is there is really fast and tonal, and it's done in such a way that it's appropriate for pretty much every genre that's not specifically bass heavy. It's weird because sometimes it's really there, but it can fall kind of flat for rap and EDM depending on the track. Overall, these are a bright headphone, sometimes a little too much for me, especially at high volume, but they're much more listenable to me than the 990. Not only do they have a more prominent bass response, but the highs and mids are also presented with a crazy level of detail. Imaging, soundstage are solid. These make great gaming headphones. So for the open backs, I would recommend these over the 990 if you have the budget. If you're using these purely for gaming, nothing else, unless you just have deep pockets, the 990 will probably do you for that. Add in any other use case and going with the 900 is worth it. You gain better definition in the mids and the highs, better bass response, they're easier to drive, and they have a detachable cable. They do have a more intense clamping force, which hopefully will break in over time. The 990 is objectively more comfortable out of the box. And that's not to say that the 900 Pro X doesn't make an excellent gaming headphone. It does. The directional positioning, the detail and layering in the high end and the mids, coupled with the soundstage, makes them outstanding for that. All I'm saying there is that if you're going to use them only for gaming, the DT990 does a perfectly fine job there for a lot less money. And I wouldn't be too quick to recommend the 1990 over these. We're talking $200 to $300 more in price to get to the 1990, and I'm just not hearing $200 to $300 worth of performance. That's not because the 1990 is lacking, it's just because these are really good for the price point. The 1990 wins in bass response, and the highs feel better balanced in comparison to the rest of the presentation, but the 900 fights a good fight. I would also pick the 900 over something like a 6XX or the Sennheiser 560S. Alright, so the 700 Pro X, the closed back version. I'm generally biased in favor of open backs, but closed backs do have an advantage in being able to isolate outside noise. They also usually have a narrower soundstage, which is helpful if you're doing really detailed studio work. The existing DT770 in either 80 or 250 ohm are well regarded as a closed back workhorse, suitable for a lot of different applications. I personally prefer the overall tonal balance of the 80 ohm as it has more forgiving highs and slightly warmer bass than its 250 ohm counterpart. I repurchased a set of these recently, and despite having experienced some much more expensive headphones in the time that I've been away from them, these were like catching up with an old friend. They have a great bass presence, great space and air in the vocal, really wide soundstage for a closed back. They do get a little toasty on the ears after a while, but they're really hard to beat at this price point. The 700 Pro X differs from the 770 in a few big ways, most of them positive. It feels overall more aggressive across the board. You get nearly that same technical performance of the 900 in the mids and the highs, but the bass feels more energetic here. The lowest regions, like the sub bass, those feel a little rolled off here, but like the 900, the bass here is very tonal and very technical. There's just more of it, and it's more in your face. The 700 can withstand high levels of volume and bass that the 770 cannot. It will reproduce stuff that will cause the 770 to distort. It's also more prominent because we're getting those detailed low mids here as well. The 770 is pretty U-shaped, it has a nice wide soundstage, and because of that, the highs and the vocals can feel a little floaty. The 700 doesn't do that. It has a more constrained soundstage and some really forward fleshed out highs. It's high energy across the board, similar to how I remember the 1770. Unfortunately, I no longer have my 17.7X because decisions had to be made and I let them go. I kick myself for it all the time, especially now because at $150 north of these, it would have made a really interesting comparison. So the decision between the 770 and the 700 basically boils down to this. If you're doing real studio work or you just want unflinching detail, the 700 gets the nod easy, even at $299, with the caveat that you'll probably run into the highs running a little hot on certain tracks. It's just technically the better headphone in terms of stark execution. If you're doing some bedroom studio work, podcasting, gaming, casual listening, the 770 is going to be more palatable. That's both in the highs not being as forward and the soundstage being a little wider for gaming. I don't have a lot to compare at a $300 price point in closebacks. The Meze Classics are the only other thing I own at this price tier. The Mezes are darker, softer, spacey, more comfortable, low end forward, like a casual listener. It's a really chill headphone. The 700 Pro X is not chill. It is amazingly clear, very fast, very technically proficient headphone. As for the Tiger 300R, this is kind of like a hidden gem in the Bear lineup. It feels like a 32 ohm 990, but with just enough of a boost in the low end and a softening of the highs to make them really great. And they have the special edition model headband that has like zero clamping force. These are insanely comfortable. Most of the time you can only find these in bundle form with the Fox mic, but if you buy directly from Beyerdynamic, you can get these from $179 as long as you don't mind the non-detachable cable, which is also very short. This is one of the easiest headphone recommendations I can make. crazy comfortable, lightweight, near perfect tonal balance, plenty of detail in the high end without ever coming off harsh, and a great soundstage. And they're only 32 ohms, so you can drive these with literally anything out there. If you don't need the isolation of a closed back headphone, these are great, easy recommend over the 770, 880, and 990. So all in all, I think Beyerdynamic did very well with the 700 and the 900. Flatly, they're just both technically better than their lower tier counterparts. You really can drive these with anything too, and they don't suffer any lack of dynamics. And on the flip side of that, they're detailed enough to reveal the differences between different amps, so they're really fun to experiment with different setups like tube amps. Again, with the 900, it's more down to use case. The 990 for me is little more than a gaming headphone. The 900, however, is very versatile. 700 versus 770 may come down more to personal taste and presentation. And if you're trying to choose between the 700 and the 900, it's easy. Get the 900, unless for some reason you really need the isolation of the closed back that the 700 offers. It is kind of a bummer that the new design is not as out-of-the-box comfortable as the existing line, but my 1990 wasn't immediately comfortable either, and it broke in great over time. On the topic of the 1770 and 1990, I really feel like these units close the gap enough that they're going to impact the sales of those units going forward. $300 for headphones is pretty up there for most people, but $600 is really up there, so I would have a hard time recommending the higher tier unless you were somewhere where you could really sit and compare the two before you made a decision. If you watch the channel regularly, you've definitely heard me talk about Nebula. If you're not familiar, Nebula is an independent streaming platform built by me and a lot of other creators you've probably heard of, like iPhonedo, MKBHD, and productivity YouTuber and entrepreneur Ali Abdaal, just to name a few. You've probably noticed lately that YouTube has been favoring a very specific style of thumbnail, title, and editing flow in order to be successful. We created Nebula to upload what we wanted to outside the influence of the YouTube algorithm. You can find Nebula exclusive content, podcasts, and even extended cuts from some of your favorite YouTubers, and all my videos are there to watch completely ad-free. The best way to get access to Nebula is to sign up for CuriosityStream, the sponsor of today's video. CuriosityStream is the world's leading documentary streaming platform with thousands of really high-quality, high-budget documentaries, and they're adding new content all the time. I've been binging the first season of Secrets of the Brain that explores everything from people with incredible memory to a man that hallucinates undiscovered cutting-edge surgery techniques. It's wild. And as you know, CuriosityStream loves to support independent content creators, so they have a bundle with Nebula where you can get access to both platforms for 26% off or $14.79 per year. That's not for the month, that's for the entire year, and you get access to the whole catalog of both CuriosityStream and Nebula. If that sounds like a good deal, head over to curiositystream.com/badseedtech. Big thanks to CuriosityStream for continuing to support the channel, and thank you so much for your time. All right, any questions, hit me in the comments, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Stay up.